Okay, we're live again on Syriana analysis. Before I start this episode, I would like to apologize to the followers of Syriana analysis. In the past two videos, I had technical problems in the audio, one time with the guest and another time with myself. My microphone was a little bit old, so I have invested now with a new microphone, as you can see, and I'm also using a better webcam. I know, guys, you have all the right to complain, but please be patient on me. I'm not a TV channel, and I don't have sponsors except you, and I don't have corporations behind me, and Assad is not paying me, Putin is not paying me, and recently some people also accuse me of getting money from the United Arab Emirates. I don't get funding from none of these places. So while I am live streaming, please let me know if you can hear my voice well. This is the first time that I use this, let's say, audio setting. Hi, Big Mini. Can you please, guys, just let me know if you can hear me well so that I start today's episode, which is going to be about a recent report published on the CBC of Canada. And it is about Canada's decision to repatriate ISIS wives from Syria. So, before I go into the details, I would like you guys just to mention I'm here watching your comments. If you can hear me, yes, I hear you fine. Good. So, today, while I was scrolling on Twitter, I came across this article which says Canada has agreed to repatriate 19 women. So, they are the wives of ISIS and children held in Syria. Now, before I go into the details of this article, I would like to address this issue from, let's put it in the proper context, right? Why a lot of people, non Syrians, went to Syria in the first place, right? And why women from other countries went thousands of miles away to join ISIS. So the goal in Syria from the beginning was a regime change. So the planners in Washington or elsewhere, they ask themselves this simple question: who will do the fighting? Who will fight Assad? Who is capable of fighting and who is willing to continue fighting against Assad? And who else than the Islamists who have a radical ideology and they are ready to fight against Assad because in their ideology they think or they believe that Assad is an infidel and he is spreading non-Islamic values or his rule is non-Islamic, so they have to remove him because for them the secular rule in Syria is a sin and it goes against their religion. This is in their interpretation of Islam. So who is going to do the fighting? Al Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, and many other radical jihadi groups in the region. Now, how do we encourage them to go to Syria, right? Okay, we found the crazy people who want to do the job for us. How can we encourage them to go to Syria? First of all, we spread the sentiments of victimhood. And this has happened especially after the fall of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, for many Muslims, especially among the Sunni people, he was a hero. He was a leader for the Muslims, for the Sunnis in the region. And when the United States toppled his regime in Iraq and they executed him and his pictures were spread, this has created a very, I would say, victimhood sentiments, and lots of people wanted to take revenge. So when the United States executed Saddam Hussein after a theatrical, of course, persecution in the court, lots of Sunnis wanted to take revenge and they hold arms. And those who aren't even radicals, they joined radical groups in Iraq to carry the fighting against the United States and others. And during this time, because of the war in Iraq and the vacuum that Iraq created. Iran has came also to replace or to fill the vacuum, right? And Iran is a Shiite country, and they felt that Iran is also gaining momentum in the region, so they wanted also to take revenge from the Shiites. And they historically, the Sunnis and the Shiites are not on in good terms, right? So the first sentiment that the American planners or the Israelis they spread it in the region is the victimhood, that you guys are victims of this brutal infidel regime, and you have to go and take revenge. So victimhood played an essential role in this regard. Secondly, is a promised utopia. They promised ISIS was very, I would say, skilled in the media affairs, in social media, in spreading their content all over the place on Facebook, on Twitter, and showing the people this so-called utopia in Syria, right? And for lots of Muslims, because especially in the past 120 years after, I would say, World War One, and even before that, during the era of the Ottoman Empire, yeah, relatively, but especially after World War One and after the toppling or the perish of the Ottoman Empire, a lot of Muslims felt that their era of glory was when they had an Islamic State, the caliphates that started after the death of the Prophet Muhammad till at the end of the Ottoman Empire. So during this time, they were expanding and they had empires, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and the Ottomans, and many other empires under the Islamic rule. So we want to go back to that glorious era, right? And there is this distorted version of the Islamic State represented by ISIS and Al Qaeda, and they're promising to return back to the glorious days. So lots of people also bought that lie and went to Syria to fight alongside ISIS or simply joining the group as a sympathizer. Guys, while I'm speaking, if you have any questions, please post. I'm checking also the comments. So, who went to Syria? This is also another good question, right? First of all, there are radical jihadists who are already skilled and trained all over the world. And those jihadists, they gained their skills in Afghanistan in the late 70s, early 80s, and the 90s, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq after the Iraqi invasion, in Libya after the NATO invasion of Libya, in Chechnya two times, the first Chechen war and the second Chechen war. So you would see that lots of people came from these countries and they were skilled and they already have military experience and fighting experience in these countries, and they came as commanders. Lots of geographies or places in Syria where these radicals attacked, the commanders were not Syrians. They were either Chechens or Iraqis or Libyans and even Egyptians and Saudis, etc., etc. And those had really good experience, and they carried out the fighting against the Syrian army. Another group of people who went to Syria to fight alongside ISIS and other radical groups are the second and third and fourth generation Muslims. And I'm not generalizing, guys, but they belong to these groups, right? And some of these people, they couldn't integrate in Western societies or elsewhere, and they either isolated themselves or they were isolated from the society because they couldn't integrate in these societies. And therefore, when you are isolated or being isolated, pushed into isolation, some of them have been radicalized. And please remember that in especially in Western countries, lots of mosques and so-called cultural centers are were funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey, and they had like a mission to radicalize the people and send them to fighting spots. The third category of people who went to fight in Syria are Westerners who converted recently to Islam, and they were again indoctrinated by the radical imams in these mosques that I mentioned. They were financed by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey. And there is a important, vital importance here. Why do some people um, convert in the West to Islam? Because, in my opinion, there are multiple reasons, but one of them is because the West abolished the church, the authority of the church, and the Christian identity as a whole, and they um, downgraded, let's say, the status of the church, and they suppressed also the national identity. And naturally speaking, or generally speaking, lots of people want to feel that they belong to a certain group. They belong to a religion or belonging to a national identity. They want to feel like they belong to an identity, more or less. And they couldn't find themselves an identity that fits them, because in the West also there are so many sub identities, and especially after the liberalism or the postmodernism ideologies spread it there, and people find themselves, they don't want to be belonging to these neoliberal ideologies or sub identities, especially the gender ideology, identity politics, etc., etc., and they found themselves more fitting in Islam. And the last category are women. Why would women go to Syria and fight alongside ISIS? Some of them accompanied their husbands because their husbands wanted to go and fight in Syria, and others simply they were brainwashed. And there is this very good documentary. I advise you to watch it on Netflix. It's called The Caliphate. It's a Swedish um, a series which speaks about the women in Sweden who went to join ISIS and how they were radicalized in Sweden by Muslim Brotherhood activists and preachers, and sent them to Syria in order either to find a husband there or to help the jihadists simply by marrying them, as um, cooking them, helping them at home, and just being a sex object for them, right? So this is the context that you will never hear or see on the Western mainstream media. So now, if we go back to the article, Louis, I will answer your question later. Let's first see this article. So Canada has agreed to repatriate 19 women and children held in Syria. Family members of 6 women and 13 children had asked courts to order the government to secure their release. The federal government is moving forward on repatriating 19 Canadian women and children held in northeastern Syria. Family members of 23 detained Canadians, 6 women, 4 men, and 13 children have asked a federal court to order the government to arrange for their return. They have argued that refusing to do so would violate their charter rights. The Canadians are among many foreign nationals in Syria detention camps for suspected ISIS members and their families. The camps are run by the Kurdish forces that reclaimed the war torn region from the extremist group. Lawrence Greenspan, the lawyer of the applicants, told CBC that an agreement has been reached to secure the release and return of the women and children. The case of the 4 men is still before the court, he said. Now, there is an analyst in the Center for Strategic and International Studies. His name is Phil Gursky. He told the CBC News Network that he doubts any of the adults returning would face justice for potential crimes they may have committed. He says, I quote, the witnesses aren't here. The evidence isn't here. He told host Natasha Fatah, as a Canadian citizen, I'm outraged that people are going to get away with it. I agree with Phil Gurski. I think they will not face persecution in Canada, and they would most probably be put. They would send them to de-radicalization schools to de-radicalize them. Right. This is what I think. It will happen under Trudeau's Canada, and before I show you this reportage, I will also mention something that I think some of you do not know. So, we all know the story of Shamima Begum, right? So, show. Guys, by the way, I don't block any comments, but YouTube filters them. Shamima Begum, spy for Canada, smuggled schoolgirl to Syria. So this is a very interesting story. The Canadian intelligence were involved in smuggling ISIS women to Syria, and now they're taking them back to to their country again. Shamima Begum, who fled the UK and joined the Islamic State group, was smuggled into Syria by an intelligence agent for Canada. This is on the BBC, guys. At the main Istanbul bus station, the girls met Muhammad al Rashid, who would facilitate their journey to ISIS controlled Syria. A senior intelligence officer at an agency which is part of the global coalition against ISIS has confirmed to the BBC that Rashid was providing information to Canadian intelligence while smuggling people to ISIS. The BBC has obtained a dossier on Rashid that contains information gathered by law enforcement and intelligence, as well as material recovered from his hard drives, which provide extraordinary detail about how he operated. He told authorities that he had gathered information on the people he helped into Syria because he was passing it to the Canadian embassy in Jordan. Rashid, who was arrested in Turkey within days of smuggling Ms. Begum to ISIS, told authorities he had shared a photo of the British school was using. The Metropolitan Police was searching for her, although by the time Canada received her passport details, Ms. Begum was already in Syria. The dossier shows that Ms. Begum was moved to Syria through a substantial ISIS people smuggling network that was controlled from the group's de facto capital in Raqqa. Rashid was in charge of the Turkish side of this network and facilitated the travel of British men, women, and children to ISIS for at least 8 months before he helped Ms. Begum and her two friends. Ms. Begum told the BBC's forthcoming I'm Not a Monster podcast he organized the entire trip from Turkey to Syria. I don't think anyone would have been able to make it to Syria without the help of smugglers. Rashid kept information about the people he helped, often photographing their ID, documents, or secretly filming them on his phone. One recording shows Ms. Begum and her friends get out of a taxi and into a waiting car not far from the Syrian border. This is Shamima Begum, and she was recorded on the mobile of this guy, Rashid, Muhammad Rashid, who smuggled her to Syria from
مثلا يوركن أم موسى محمد يوسف yeah. Everybody take his bag. Don't forget anything. تمام تمام. Okay. Five come here. Go four here. To this car. Put your bags. يلا hurry don't stop here. Only surround us for here.
So this is the guy recording them while helping them to be smuggled to Syria. Rashid said that in 2013 he had gone to the Canadian embassy in Jordan to try to apply for asylum. He said, I quote, "They told me they were going to grant me my Canadian citizenship if I collect information about the activities of ISIS." So he did this just to get a citizenship. So there are people like ready to help ISIS to get the citizenship of Canada, and those people were, in my opinion, the lowest of the lows of the Syrian society, who consider themselves revolutionaries and freedom fighters, and they are selling their country to the outside world just to get the fucking citizenship. It's so shameful. So the lawyer of the Begum family, Mr. Akunji, said it was shocking that a Canadian intelligence asset was a key part of the smuggling operation. Someone who is supposed to be an ally protecting our people rather than trafficking British children into a war zone. Quote, intelligence gathering looks to have been prioritized over the lives of children. I mean, the lawyer is definitely he has a right. Is correct, but in my opinion, Britain is not. Britain also played a similar role in Syria, especially in encouraging the jihadists and also turning a blind eye for the jihadists who came from Britain. Even there were campaigns of mobilization for the Islamists in Britain and to send them to Syria, and the British authorities did nothing about it. So I think this is more like some sort of a disagreement between the UK and Canada that that, that the BBC wrote something about this, made an investigation about it. This is just to bash Britain, sorry, Canada, but at the same time, Britain did also worse than what Canada did in this regard. Now, this is a reportage by the CBC or the CBS or whatever, the Canadian TV channel on the matter. Natasha Fatah, she speaks about this case today. Let's take a look.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natasha Fatah. Welcome to The Rundown. We're going to begin with some breaking news from Ottawa regarding the fate of a number of Canadians who have been detained in northeastern Syria. CBC News has confirmed there's now a timeline for their repatriation. The group is made up of 6 Canadian women and their 13 children. The CBC's Karina Roman is covering this story for us. Karina, what do we know about this deal so far?
Well, the lawyer for the 6 women and their 13 children who are detained in Syria say that, the families who were bringing these people's case to federal court are going to discontinue that application before the court because a deal has been reached between the government and his clients. A mutually acceptable resolution is what he said, within a mutually acceptable time frame. So Global Affairs Canada, the government, for the government and the applicants have come to this deal. Now, before this case went to federal court in December, there was the revelation of a document filed in court from the government that showed that these people actually met this 2021 government threshold for what they called extraordinary assistance. So it seemed like the government was open to finally repatriate these people. But the court case went ahead, and in that court case, the government had argued that it has no obligation to repatriate them. But now there is this deal, this agreement to repatriate. As I said, the timeline has also been agreed to. We are not being told what the timeline is for security reasons. I should point out that there are 4 Canadian men who are part of this federal court case as well. They are not part of this deal, so their court case will continue. And just to remind viewers of the background, I mean, these women and men went over to Syria to either join or support ISIS. The Kurdish fighters reclaimed that part of Syria and are the ones who are running these detention camps of these people. The Kurds have been asking the Canadian government to repatriate their Canadian citizens for a long time now.
Okay, so we know that there's very strong opinions and lobbies involved in this case. Karina, I wonder if you can describe to us the federal government was facing on this.
Well, yeah, there's the mindset of, well, these people chose to go support a terrorist organization, and basically they should reap the consequences over there and rot over there in the detention camps. But human rights advocates and groups argue that these are Canadian citizens. They were in inhumane conditions for years, and that if they repatriated and face criminal consequences here, if that includes charges. In fact, I should mention 2 women and their children were already repatriated in October, and both those women were charged shortly after coming back to Canada. Now, it's not clear whether these 6 women coming back with their 13 children will be charged or not. And so that was, of course, that question was put to the lawyer, Lawrence Greenspan. This is what he had to say.
Certainly, the government has the ability, if they have the evidence and if they choose to prosecute, they certainly have a department of lawyers and paralegals, so they can do that.
So we'll see what happens once they are brought back. But the government was also under pressure because many advocates would say, the men and the women who went over did so as adults, knowing what they were doing. But the children that have been born in the meantime had no choice in this. And they too were in these detention camps, and they're innocent children. And so they needed to be brought back. With at least one parent. And that's why the women are coming back as well. Now, I also mentioned there was also pressure because Canada was starting to become an outlier in this. Many Western nations had been repatriating their citizens and then having them face charges back in their countries. And Canada had been an outlier on this. So there was also that pressure to, you no longer had an excuse if other countries were doing that.
Okay, CBC's Karina Roman in Ottawa. Thank you.
There are 2 things here, or 3 things I would like to mention. First of all, she says that they are living in inhumane conditions in Syria, and that is true. However, they participated in creating these inhumane conditions in Syria, right? conditions in Syria before the war was very humane and very developed and very secure and very safe, and especially for women. But these people participated in turning the conditions in Syria into an inhumane conditions. So they brought this upon themselves. Okay. There were always a big argument that these people should be stand in front of a trial in Syria, but this is not going to happen. And Syria, I think it doesn't have any interest in that. They just want them to go back to their countries anyways, because they're so busy to make a reconciliation in the country and in the neighboring countries, and they want to finish everything and forget about what happened. Secondly, it's yeah, human rights. They have Canadian citizenship, and there is human rights, and these people shouldn't rot or die in these camps, right? But what about the human rights of the Syrians? There's no journalist asking this question or any expert. What about the human rights of the Syrians to live in peace, in stability? That these people came to Syria and turned their lives into hell. I mean, the Syrians suffered a lot from the multinational jihadists, and the number of the multinational jihadists who died in Syria with tens of thousands. So, what about the human rights of the people who lost their sons, their daughters, or somebody was raped by these people? And there were so many people who were used as sex slaves. They were ethnic cleansing in Syria by these ISIS terrorists. Bashar al-Assad, thank you very much for your tip. I really appreciate it. Again, you said thank you for your work. I believe this is a duty for me, so I do it for that. And the third thing, there was the inhumane conditions and the human rights issue. The only thing that I think here is makes sense is are the children. The children have no. I mean, you cannot blame them. This is what their mothers and their fathers chose, and many of them they were born. They were born in Syria or born in this. So I would definitely encourage them to go back to their countries, these children. But the people who committed crimes in Syria, they should at least stand in front of a court in Canada. But since there is no eyewitnesses or there is no mechanism to put them in front of trial, there is no eyewitnesses, there is no evidence, concrete evidence. I'm not sure that Canada will do that, especially under Trudeau's leadership, unfortunately. Now, in the questions, Louis H. asked me, why do the Assyrian Christians fight the Syrian Arab army and line up with the American army? Why are they against the Syrian army? I don't think they're against the Syrian army. There are two types I will explain to you. One, lots of Assyrians joined the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, because back then, when the war was the hostilities against ISIS, they wanted to join SDF to defend themselves, and they managed to save their families from ethnic cleansing that happened against the Yazidis. Remember? Um, but and many of them they don't consider the Syrian army an enemy, but because the Syrian army was not present there and wasn't stretched in the eastern side of Syria, they didn't have a choice but to join SDF. Um, but there is a minority of the Assyrian Christians, and I think Zionism has played a big role there. And there are Assyrians in Europe, and they are preachers, Christian preachers that are not really different from ISIS. And I can give you an example of someone called Maggie Khzam. Maggie Khzam, you can go and Google and search for her. She is just the same, the other face or the other side of the coin of ISIS, in my opinion. And she's playing a very destructive sectarian role, and she is mobilizing also people against the Syrian government, etc., etc. So there is like that and like that, but the majority of the Assyrians are with the Syrian government and the Syrian army, in my estimation. Um, he's starting to distribute asylum titles to the White Helmets again. I mean, Canada received White Helmets volunteers who have experience in staging chemical attacks, and they were present in executions, and they were part in creating manufacturing theaters in Syria in order to drag foreign powers to come and bomb Syria. So this, in my opinion, they're dangerous people. They're not normal white helmets people that Canada received. And similarly in Germany, Germany also received here, and their whereabouts is secret and nobody can investigate, and no journalist wants to investigate that as well, because they don't want to be suicided or Epsteined. And if you don't know, there was a Syrian from the White Helmets here in Germany. I think this was in 2018. He planned to um, bomb the Berlin airport. And before he committed his crime, he was captured by the authorities in Germany, and he was sent to investigation, and he committed suicide again in the prison. You know, these people, they have big secrets behind them, and they're directly financed by. He was planning to bomb the Berlin airport. You can search about it. You can see White Helmets Berlin airport bombing plot or etc. And I think it was in 2018. So these people aren't normal, just citizens who are getting asylum. They were assets in Syria, and they have to be protected one way or another. And remember, they escaped from Daraa, the southern city in Syria, to Israel. Israel received them, and then they sent them to Jordan, and from Jordan they went to the all around the world. So, in my opinion, it's a big, big theater and a shame for the Western governments to side alongside this type of people. So, in your opinion, guys, um, what do you think about the case of this woman that Canada wants to receive? Do they pose any danger to the Canadian society? Do you think they can be fixed, like re-educated, sent to de-radicalization schools, or they should stand in front of a court and go to jail? And what about their children? And what about their husbands? Because for the moment only, it seems that the women are coming to Canada. Um, and the person Bashar, he gifted 20 Syrian analysis memberships to the people. Thank you so much, Bashar. Really appreciate it. And as I mentioned, I invested in this microphone. It's a really expensive one. I have received lots of complaints in the past two videos, and I wanted everything to be more professional. And the voice is very important for live streamings. And what do you think about it? Is it good enough, or I should also raise my voice, because I think it's doing well according to my equalizer here on the software. So guys, this was the case of the Canada's decision to receive ISIS wives and their kids, and let's see what's going to happen with their husbands, and I will definitely update if something new pops up. Tomorrow at 9 p.m., 9 Central European Time, I'm going to interview an historian. She is a wonderful person, and also she's active on Twitter. I'm not going to disclose her name now, but tomorrow I'm going to interview her at 9 p.m. Central European Time, and we will speak about Ukraine from a historical context, because she's a historian. I will ask her questions like the status of Ukraine before World War I, who ruled Ukraine in the 19th century, what happened to Ukraine after World War I, the Soviet living under the Soviet rule, the famine that hit Ukraine in the 30s, World War II, who from these groups in Ukraine fought alongside Hitler against the Russians, and can we draw parallels, similarities between what happened in World War II and what's happening now in the proxy war? So these questions, I think, are also important for us to understand the current situation in Ukraine. So stay tuned. If you're new, please subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video with your friends. And if you want to support my independent work, for me also to sustain and be able to finance all this stuff, guys, please consider becoming a premium member, or you can become a patron, or simply through PayPal, so that I can also continue bringing you such content.